United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We have a quorum of the committee present. We have at the courthouse our Vice Chair Marshall, County Board Chair Gibbs, and myself. And we have Supervisor Reynolds participating remotely. Supervisors Hart, Lemmer, and Poole have been excused. So don't leave. Public comments? No one has approached either the clerk or myself. Therefore, we will move on to the minutes. And I have a question. Mike, did you hear my gibberish of a voicemail?
I did.
And?
I agree with your assessment that in the minutes on the first page, at the end, discussion and possible action resulting from closed session discussion, it says motion by Gibbs, second by Hart to approve the resolution, approving the resolution that was discussed in closed session. Identifying that resolution, I think, would be appropriate. I can provide the clerk the name of the resolution for the updated minutes.
Would it be the resolution approving the deputy sheriff's collective bargaining agreement?
That's the one.
And we could insert that, because it was confusing to me, and for somebody not looking at it, we were discussing various aspects of the resolution in the minutes. I think it would be clear for the public. If that would be.
Can you just say approving the resolution approving the deputy sheriff's?
The deputy sheriff's collective bargaining agreement.
I can make that.
And what are your wishes relative to the minutes? Chair Gibbs.
Make a motion to approve the minutes with the corrections stated on the closed session language.
Is there a second? Seconded by Supervisor Marshall, Vice Chair. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor will signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Opposed, no. That motion carries unanimously. We'll jump to 6A, operational approval of claims and question costs.
Good afternoon. I emailed out the question cost for December. They are in chronological order, starting with check 1027686 all the way to 1028844, which is the continuation from the last report that was given. And then the ETF range was from 1103505 to 1107963. The variances or the missing EFT numbers were explained. Since we share the EFT numbers with the city of Wausau and CCITC, there are ranges in there that are missing. And again, that range starts from the last report that was given all the way to the end of December.
Any questions? Any motions? Chair Gibbs.
Make a motion to approve the claims and question costs.
That is second by Supervisor Marshall, Vice Chair. Any questions? If not, all those in favor of approving the claims and question costs will signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, no. That motion carries unanimously. Update on efforts to address tax delinquent properties, including but not limited to the new batch of in-rem filings and handling of tax bills that have been historically undeliverable, and possible action by the committee relative to next steps. Administrator Leonard.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So there is a memo on page 4 of your packet that kind of goes through and summarizes the effort. It is tried to keep it as short as possible, but succinctly put, as set forth in the memo, we sent out over 1,200 letters, past due notifications to those parcels, that the owners of parcels with those delinquent taxes. Everyone in the county did receive a letter, except, as I wrote in the memo, we did pull out 131 parcels, which I think Connie will talk about later, that were identified as being in what was envisioned in batch 2 that the treasurer's office would be proceeding with in rem. The important thing, I'm sure you're all wondering about kind of the impact. So we tried to maximize impact. We sent these out on yellow, bright yellow paper in an envelope with red past due notice on the outside. My assessment, I do think we've had a pretty positive response rate in terms of people showing up to make payments. So you'll see that the chart that I put in the memo is actually, I could have termed that a bit differently to be more clear, but that's actually the net impact in terms of, so for certificates, those are the number of tax certificates that essentially no longer exist. People came in and paid those past due taxes from that year on a particular parcel. So from 2013, you'll see we actually had 14 certificates that between October 25th, or excuse me, October 10th, to when we ran this report most recently, which I believe is January 10th. So October 11th to January 11th, we had 14 fewer certificates in 2013 alone. And then as you follow across, you'll see in each particular year how much past due real estate tax was owed, that was received, special assessments and charges, and then the total. I don't have, Chair Robinson asked, and I didn't think of this before, and we'll have to look to see if our system allows it, but the interest and penalties I didn't have, but nevertheless, you'll see the impact. And just a disclaimer here, the 2024 impact, that is certainly true. We have 434 fewer certificates over that time span. That is not, I certainly don't want to leave you with the impression that that's due to these letters going out. Those were the most recent owed taxes. I think it's reasonable to assume that a fair number of people are just delinquent in any one year. But if you go back further, you'll see, I think it's much more likely that the reason people were coming in was a result of these communications. So you'll see the total net impact, about little over 1.4 million. Again, even if you exclude the 780,000 from the 2024 or current year, at least at the time it was the current year taxes that we're doing, you're still talking about a pretty substantial kind of return on our investment of time. And I do want to say thank you to certainly CCIT and administration staff and other departments that assisted. This was a bit of an undertaking, but I think it certainly worked out very well. So before I jump ahead to a different part on the agenda, which is how are we going to move forward with what we had historically referred to as slivers, or perhaps now better termed, at least some of the properties were previously undeliverable tax bills. I did want to allow the opportunity for at least questions on kind of what I'll say is what administration undertook since we started the process.
So are there questions relative to the process that we employed? So we didn't send out the 131 relative to the next tranche, whatever you want to call it, of those. And but we were going to handle those separately, and we'll come back. I'd like to come back to that issue, but I would like, if we're looking at 18%, and if it's not compounded, that you're looking at almost double that amount in terms of interest and penalties, or more than double that over a 10-year period. So if you're starting to deal with some of those 2015 and beyond, but the concern that I continue to have is that we're writing off anything beyond 10 years. And so I think we've got to focus our efforts in trying to get those reconciled or addressed, and so that we're not, we're buying those tax rolls from other entities, and if we don't collect it, we lose that opportunity going forward. So I think we need to tighten that aspect up going forward. Maybe that can be part of the next steps discussion. But other questions that the committee has? Supervisor Marshall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wondered if administration thinks this would be a necessary, helpful every 3 months to do? At what interval do you feel it would be helpful to keep sending these letters that are on yellow paper with red lettering?
Yeah, that was actually the thing that Chair Robinson and I were going to specifically ask. That's a great question. I don't know. I think it's certainly something we should do on a recurring basis, at least once a year, whether we do it twice a year, because people are getting their tax bills also. And I think Connie can talk to this, but I believe if there's a past due amount on your tax bill, it references at least, there's a checkbox that says past due on it. So it's not the bright yellow paper, it's not the red lettering, but I don't think there will be any dissension around the idea that we should make this a recurring thing. It's just like any other business where if you owe a business money, they do a very good job of telling you about it. I think, at least once a year, I could see the benefit of going twice. I don't know if I'd say more. I don't know, Sam, do you have a thought on how often, did you guys do this up in Lincoln, how often you would send, what I'll call reminder letters?
I don't remember if it was once or twice a year, but usually after, like sometime in the fall time, just as a reminder in case somebody missed their mid-year tax payment, because when they get their original tax bills, it doesn't show your prior years that you owe, it just shows the current year. So if somebody had forgotten, that's usually where you'll catch those. But then again, in the beginning of the year too, just that reminder that they are delinquent.
So the tax bills are under an installment system. It's January 31st and July 31st, and we give a little bit of, is that the second payment?
Yes, depending on, I think the city of Wausau might have a couple more installments in there. Some municipalities do, but like a lot of the townships, it's either January 31st or January 31st for everything, or January 31st and July 31st. It splits it out roughly half and half.
Chair Gibbs.
Just a question, Lance. So of the 1,300 that you sent out, did we have any amount of those come back as undeliverable? And if so, what process are we looking at as far as identifying the property owner or the current property owner to deliver those notices to?
That's a great question. I'll look into that. I don't have that in front of me. I seem to recall that we got some back, and I would assume we would get some back based on the conversation we're going to have here in a minute about the other ones. But I can get some general numbers on that.
Supervisor Marshall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just wondering on the April timeframe, as people get their income tax refunds back, that might be a good time to remind them that they have a bill due.
Would it be possible for us, we can bifurcate the process potentially, and we can look at those that have beyond a year, the current year delinquency, which would allow us to be a little bit more, you could be a little bit more aggressive relative to the delinquency. So they're like this, the tax bill you received in December, we wouldn't deal with that until obviously we were beyond the time frame. But if it was owed for in December or last year, we could be more aggressive and say, I think your idea of an April would make sense. How hard would that be for us to break out? Connie's on remote. Can we collect that information and generate that? I would imagine through the counter book, we could track that.
So my understanding, and Connie, please correct me if I'm wrong if you know, but we had IT helped a lot in this process. And I think as long as we get a process in place that is easily repeatable, I think we'll be fine. I don't know that we'll be able to hit all the marks that you're talking about, but I know we can exclude, like we pulled out, like I said, the 131 parcels. We can, I'm sure, run the report as of a certain date, but I'll circle back to IT to see whether or not it makes sense to, at least for that first notification, if it comes out in that April timeframe, you would want to affirmatively exclude the present year because they might not actually be delinquent. They might just be paying in the installments. But for that later one in the year, it could be the general letter. But we did create a template, and IT wrote some scripts to make sure that all came through. But certainly a good thing for us to consider. I think the threshold is, what I hear you saying is you want us to continue this process, which is not a surprise to me. Not only did it make sense, but it actually seems to work. So we can continue that, and if we do it twice a year, that would be the general preference right now? Is that what I'm hearing?
Chair Gibbs.
I fully support that. I think the premise that we, concentrate on the ones that we have tax certificates on, rather than, as you mentioned, the current year property taxes, because they won't become delinquent, but at some point they may. But then we'll have a certificate on those parcels also. So I think sending out notices on these parcels that have tax certificates is the appropriate approach.
Connie, is there anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, so you can hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so back to the letters that were originally sent, we received 52 of them back. So they're undeliverable. So that's the number that I have in my office. I don't know if any of them have gone anywhere else, but we have 52 of them that came back because of the addresses. Secondly, we send out a notice that's that revised notice of anybody who has not paid at least the first installment. That goes out in March. My suggestion would be to send this letter out in August because we don't notify anybody. We could do, if you wanted to do it twice, I would do it potentially because you're getting the letter in March, maybe May or early June, send it, and then send it again maybe after the certificate, because then they get it before the end of the year. But we don't send anything out in between March 1st and July 31st. So I would suggest it in between that time frame.
Connie, this is Lance. Is that March letter, that's the letter that they haven't made they still have a remaining balance in the current tax year. Is that right?
Yeah, they haven't paid the first installment. So that's that one that we're going to be revising. It's only for the first installment, because if they didn't pay the first installment, then they owe all of it. They don't get that option until July. So that's that March letter. But then this other letter, the letter that you sent, can be delivered to them because we send nothing in between till July, till after, like, September 1st would be technically the next letter we send. And we always send receipts. And when those receipts get received by them, when they pay it, if there's a balance due, they know what that is. But in between that summertime, they don't know, and some of them don't remember that, hey, I got to pay this or I got to get this paid. We can send out this notice to remind them, hey, you still have delinquent taxes. Why don't you pay us before July? I mean, if you're looking at the 2 times to send it, and then send it out, because then I send another one September 1st. That's the initial certificate. If we want to send it before we issue that certificate again, we could catch it beforehand.
Okay. Yeah, I think, Connie, maybe if the committee would support this, I can sit down with Connie and put together a calendar of when communications would go out relative to taxes. I think if there's an opportunity, because our system does allow us to, as Connie alluded to, modify the template letters, if we can get the March communication to not only cover individuals that if I haven't made my first installment in a given tax year, if we can get that communication to also, for those individuals, send the full, hey, you're also, not only, Lance, are you delinquent for 2024, or I guess now it's going to be 25, come the end of March, if I hadn't made my first installment, I'd get the, Lance, you haven't paid as required in its March of 25. But if the letter can also include, and you also have back taxes from 24, 23, 22 with a balance, I think that makes sense, Connie. I think the committee, what I'm hearing is a consensus that we really need to communicate at least twice a year for individuals that have kind of that perennial issue that they have longstanding back taxes. Now, again, we should, which I think the goal of this whole discussion is, we should clean up this list substantially in the near future anyway, but at least for the time being, get those communications out at least twice a year. They will be larger communications still in terms of number, but moving forward, that should be a lot fewer people. So Connie, does that make sense if you and I sit down and you put together a calendar of what you're already doing, and we can bring back a draft to this committee as, you know, who are we going to send letters to? What are the populations we're going to serve, and at what times?
Could I also ask that as part of that discussion, I know that at the last Western Towns Association, I had actually 2 town officials come up to me relative to the tax delinquency, and they want to know what properties are tax delinquent because they can help us. And I think particularly as it relates to those 52 that were undeliverable and others, we might be, if we could share some of the information maybe at year 3 with town officials and saying these people haven't paid taxes for 3 years, maybe we can have them help, you know, be of assistance to us.
Mr. Chair, great segue. That's an update that we didn't put on the agenda, but Connie and I did talk about that, and Connie did send out a communication with the counter book attachments to each municipality. And Connie, correct me if I'm wrong, but you actually ran specific reports. Is that right, for each municipality, not sending them just a large report, but their own?
Right. So each municipality, the clerk and treasurer. So the clerk and treasurer are typically your communication funnel for each municipality. Those are the 2 individuals that give the information to the board. So I sent it both to the clerk and the treasurer. They each got their own individual counter books, and they received it before they start receipting. So as they're receipting, and a lot of them have already brought that report to their board, and they're all going through those, looking at the slivers. They're looking at the residents that haven't paid. They're trying to reach out to those residents. And just as a positive note, I had one resident come in today that their board reached out to him. He has 2 parcels that are significantly overdue. The property is in probate, but we are working with him right now and hopefully have payment within the next 3 months or so with his attorney. So it is effective, and neighbors are looking at their parcels next to them and they're calling us. So having the community look and help us out is very significant. It's working.
That's great news. Thank you for that effort. Anything else? Kurt, did you?
No, let's take care of it.
So I think what we'd like to do is maybe work on that schedule. And then I'm wondering, Sam, when that money comes in, where does it go? What account does it go into?
Money from delinquent taxes, interest and penalty will depend. So any taxes that were owed will go towards the asset account or the receivable for it. And then interest and penalty should be in the revenue account under the treasurer's department.
Is there a way for us to, particularly as we're going into this, we've created, or we set aside funds this year to help with those efforts and others, I think, just to get an idea of the success of those efforts? Is there a way for us to get a report on what those might be between you and Connie? And I think that would be something of benefit to the county board to understand the value of those efforts.
So John, this is Connie. I wanted to provide this and work with Sam on this. What I want to do eventually, hopefully within the next month or so, I want to provide what we have. So I'm currently in tax settlements, which is working with all the treasurers right now. Our first settlement is due today. So that's the January settlement. The next settlement is due February 20th. So those settlements are coming in, but we have to make sure that I'm working with the treasurers to get these dollars to us. So like I said, the first one's is due today to the county and the school districts. So we're moving on with that. But in between, we have been significantly collecting a lot of back taxes. So I haven't had time, and my staff hasn't had time to really look into what we've received and what's been paid and what is basically from the letters we sent, what we have returned, and basically who's paid. We don't have I want to have accurate numbers to give to the board so you actually know how effective it is. But I'm asking that I have time with my staff to go over that because like I said, every day we are collecting money of back taxes, and it's close to at least maybe a little over 100,000 a week that we're getting in back taxes. So the processes that we're using are significant. We're seeing the yellow forms come in. They're paying them. The counter book is effective. They have my letters. I have attorneys calling me. I have title companies calling me. But like I said, we collect the money, but I haven't had enough time, and my staff has not, because of the time frame and taxes that we're in right now. I haven't had time to look at the spreadsheets to see who significantly paid and who hasn't. So I'm planning to have that for the board in the month of February.
If you could, in the context of the schedule for
Yep.
the letters, maybe address some of these ancillary issues, that would be great.
Yep.
All right.
Connie, I think one thing, if you can get me because I think to Connie's point, it has been effective. I've walked by the treasurer's office, and I actually know a local VP of a bank, and I said, hey, how's it going? Hello. And he was there on behalf of an investment that the bank has and a security interest in a quite large property, paying off $40,000 in taxes. So there's a lot of people coming in. But Connie, specifically on that batch 2, I know we pulled 131. In light of the workload that you talked about, I assume there's a fair number of those perhaps that haven't gone out yet. My inclination go ahead.
There's 52 that have paid in full. I sent 42 out, but the problem is we received a lot of the certified mailings returned to us as undeliverable. So and also in light of that list, there's quite a few in probate and bankruptcy. Those we can't touch. I'm working with Runkle on those as we speak. I'm working with them right now, and they are just also concluding phase 3. So
I think one of the benefits that in a past legal life that I saw when we'd send out certified, and I know a lot do come back, we may be served well by taking the ones that came back undeliverable and the ones that still have delinquent taxes that you haven't sent out yet. If you can get me that information, I'll just revise the letter and we'll send it first class mail, because first class mail will get forwarded to forwarding addresses as opposed to certified mail. And again, based on my past life, we would actually get more people respond to first class mail because of that forwarding. So if you can get me that in the next, I'm gone next week, but you get it to me after that, I'll make sure we get that revised letter. And when we look at the counter book, just for the committee's information, that batch 2, if you think about what's up on the screen, the impact of the tax certificates, a lot of the parcels that Connie referenced in batch 2, those are the ones that have a much higher dollar amount that is owed. So the 131 that we pulled, I just ran an Excel report right now, that is just shy of $1.2 million of just real estate taxes that are due. So it's a large dollar amount with a fewer parcels. Good to hear that a significant number have paid off. But Connie, if we I'll send out a first-class letter to those remaining ones. And hopefully then more people come in and pay, which will reduce what we need to do in terms of batch 2. We did send out that what was envisioned to be in batch 3, those we already sent out as part of the past due notification. So I think we've handled that. But if you can get me that list from the 131, the ones that came back undeliverable, or the ones that have not gone out yet and have still not paid in full, I'll have staff get the rest out.
Okay.
All right. So
I have a question for Michael, because the discussion is we can't touch cases in bankruptcy or probate. Does bankruptcy discharge the tax liability?
No, typically municipal taxes that are owed are not discharged or touched by bankruptcies.
So it's just potentially delays with subject to interest and penalties.
Right. I don't know the particular cases, but I think that could be one of the potential outcomes.
just thinking out loud, but if it's in probate, it might not be a bad thing for us to send the communication, because my sense is then it would highlight that for the probate process to at least identify who the property is going to go to, and then hopefully they pay.
Right. Another possibility is alerting active probates of a potential claim that we have, even if we're not required to make a formal claim. That could result in the back taxes being paid as a part of the estate being closed. So that's, and we've done that. One of the other hats I wear in the county is representing our child support agency, and we've made claims against estates to collect past due child support. So it would be a similar process.
So just again, Connie, I think let's include those properties in that list you're going to send me if they're part of the 131, so we don't lose those. But we can report back to the committee with at least to the things you've talked about right now. We can come back with a calendar of when we would send out letters and tell you what those letters might look like. And we will also give you hopefully an update on our ability to get out those additional letters of the remaining, whatever's remaining of the 131 that still have past due balances, and that we can send out the kind of past due notice to.
Any other questions or thoughts?
I did want to bring up the little wrinkle that Connie alerted to me about the slivers, which is a very nuanced piece, unless you had anything else on this part.
No, we'll get down into the slivers.
Yeah. All right. I'll start, and Connie, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm going to pull up the working document on the screen to just demonstrate kind of what I'm talking about. You'll see, and perfect, in the city of Mosinee, right at the top, we have this parcel that is listed. The owners are listed as Gio Robichaud and Mary Robichaud, and their address, I think, is probably familiar to a number of you as 500 Forest Street, which is where we are currently located. So when initially I had staff from Corp Council put this document together, I asked for them to break out the parcels that were addressed to the county, thinking those were owned by Marathon County. For example, if we had purchased property for road right-of-way and ultimately did not need it, that there might be a sliver parcel remaining, hence the tab we're on, which is likely slivers. But in speaking with Connie, I think we have, it's more likely what happened is that these were tax bills that years ago, and you can see they're going back to 2013 for this first parcel, that were undeliverable, and people in their roles before many of the people in this room, certainly before myself and I think before Connie, made the decision to have that address changed to 500 Forest Street, or you'll see, if I can find one real quickly, they might have CO or care of Marathon County on some of these. But Marathon County actually doesn't own the parcel. Why that's important is that, simply put, we can't sell stuff we don't own. You can, but you generally get in trouble for that. So what that means is that we would likely have to investigate each parcel. I think it more than likely, we would actually have to do this. We would investigate each parcel, kind of better understand the circumstances, and it would either have to go through some process, whether that is if the parcel would need to go through the tax foreclosure process, or if it was through probate. Is there the possibility that through escheats it comes to the county? I don't know. But until we own it, we really can't do anything relative to sale. However, notifying potential owners, if these owners are still alive, or if we can notify kind of their next of kin, potential owners, to take action to pay back the taxes. So why that's important is I can show you just scrolling through, if we look at the number of parcels we're talking about, this is going to be accurate but not precise because it's through Excel and there's some blank cells. But you'll see it's 98 parcels are flagged. It's probably closer to between 85 and low 90s number of parcels. So a fair number of parcels, but the thing I always look to the county board for, and I'm looking to all of you for, is how much of a priority do you want to make this? And for context, my sense is it's not a high priority, because when you look at all of the real estate taxes that are due on all of those parcels that I just talked about 90 parcels, you're at $7,050. So certainly something we need to get cleaned up, but not top of the list when we're talking about, at least I think, when we're talking about just the 131 parcels that Connie and I were just referencing, that those parcels have $1.2 million in back taxes owed. So wanted to update you that the likely slivers is perhaps more nuanced, or perhaps even just straight up misleading. But at least get consensus from this group that I'm not off base by saying, while it's a challenge, while it's an issue, take the more expensive fruit first, and keep this on the list to follow up on. Connie, sorry, I just want to make sure, did I kind of lay that out correctly as kind of how you understand it?
Sorry, I had to find my mute button. Yes. So a lot of those parcels, when I reached out to the previous treasurers, they put that there because they didn't have any place to deliver them. So they just were never corrected, and they kind of are just slivers too. But we also have another file that's actually just slivers. So comparing the two of them and the tax bills, we'll get it figured out. But we have to do a little bit of research on each one of them. So
Chair Gibbs.
Lance, I think you characterized it correctly. I mean, if we're talking about $7,000 of total tax, obviously there may be some specials, there may be there would be interest and penalty that would add to that. But that's not the significant portion. I mean, when we look at, 2015, 2016, we're talking those parcels. We're talking about 71 tax certificates, 114 tax certificates, 93 tax certificates, and $120,000 in tax and specials. So I think our efforts are, you characterize it correctly. We need to understand the magnitude of the slivers, but I think the magnitude as far as dollars and cents, we need to obviously get the back taxes of the biggest portion first, because I don't want to continue to write off significant dollars when those properties continue to fall off, as in the 10th year or the 11th year. The question that I would have is, of those 90 slivers that you had, how many tax certificates are associated with? Because each tax year is issued one certificate. So I think the number of certificates is going to be also significant off of the 2,858 that were remaining that are on the 11025 report, counterbook report.
So it's going to be, I can give you a number that's close for the same reason I referenced before. There's some blank cells in this Excel document, but I would say about 530 based on just highlighting this, that's how many tax certificates.
So we're really talking about a fifth of the total tax certificates, and a total, a little less than a fifth. But I think our efforts need to concentrate on what we were talking about before, and that is the back taxes on the significant properties in the 131 in batch 2, and then also batch 3.
The only other update I have, unless you have anything else, Connie, is just to inform this committee of some conversation at the Extension Education Economic Development Committee and work staff are doing relative to tax foreclosed properties, which kind of will lead into Kim's update later. There has been discussion at that committee and a desire to have staff move forward with bringing a draft to that committee for consideration of a deed restriction on tax foreclosed properties, specifically properties that have housing on them already, that there would be a prohibition consistent with what was started in Bayfield County and being utilized there, a prohibition on use of that property for short-term rental for a period of 10 years, and the other deed restriction that they're having us bring a draft forward for consideration to the committee is if the tax foreclosed parcel was a vacant parcel, but is buildable, that there be a deed restriction that requires construction of residential housing on it within 2 years, which is actually consistent with some of the sales that this committee and the county board have approved in the last 12 months, but just wanted to give you that update. Mike is working on that. We got at least the resolutions from Bayfield County, but the committee asked us to move that forward for consideration.
Chair Gibbs.
In that light, Administrator, do we know how many, by taking out the 500 tax deeds certificates on slivers, of the remaining 2,300 that are actually maybe correct that. How many of the parcels out there are actually homes that are potentially occupiable as residents? Do we have any kind of indication? Are we talking 4 parcels, or are we talking 400 that potentially would be residential property?
I don't have those numbers. I mean, I think we could probably get if you went through the counter book one line at a time to see, I mean, I'd just be guessing, but is the tax bill relatively low or is it relatively high? And if it's a relatively low one, I'd say, hey, undeveloped. If it's higher, I'd probably put a check mark one way or the other. I'm not sure of a way within our system if we can do that. Connie, does that, I'm not aware of a way to run a counter book report that differentiates between developed and undeveloped.
No, we'd have to look at each one of them, just because a lot of the parcels that we just recently took, it's just land. It's because they raised the house that was on it. So we'd have to look at each one of them to see what's actually on the parcel. And I mean, I can look in further to see if we can pull something maybe out of the assessment book, potentially for the county, but I can look into that.
Is there a way to look at improvements? The value of improvements relative to the base value?
Yeah,
Is there a way of-
there might be some report in a sense. I probably will have to work with my lister, and he might be able to help, and possibly IT as well. So
Chair Gibbs.
there's got to be an easier way to see it all.
Connie, wouldn't there be the opportunity to pull, if they have the first dollar property tax credit on it, that would indicate that that is a parcel that had, at one time was residential property?
Yes, but I'm not sure exactly how the reporting runs, and because some of the reports that we get out of Ascent don't actually give us what we're looking for. So we can just play around with the reports, and I can even see if potentially Transcendent might be able to provide us a report that could do that. That's an option too. So I'd have to actually look at each one of the reports to see what it actually gives us.
Can I just go back to the second phase or second batch? So of that 131, 40, did I understand that 42 letters have been sent out to the second batch for NREM?
Yes, and several of them have been returned with undeliverable. So I have to go through each one of them and look at all of them. And then, like I said, we had, I think it was 52 of them paid in full. And we keep receiving more of them, but like I said, I don't have the spreadsheets completely up to date because we've been very busy in the office with settlements.
So can you?
So I
address-
I would have liked to give you a more accurate number.
So we can get that
I
report, as
Yep.
part of that next step.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Connie, if you can again work on the 42 that came back or however many came back undeliverable, and then just the ones that of the 131. And I'll send you the list so you can just highlight the parcels, categorize them one way or the other, whether you sent one or not, and we'll just send out
Yep.
the communication to everyone that you haven't already sent it to or that hasn't paid in full.
Okay.
Or that came back undeliverable, those three.
Okay.
All right. Thank you. Any other questions, comments, suggestions? Okay. We will move on to, who's going to do the introduction of our,
Oh, sure, I can start. Jenny can grab a microphone, but I don't believe we've done introductions. Of course, you're very familiar with all the department heads that have been before you throughout this term, and many of them previously to this term. But we do have one new department head that will be reporting to this committee frequently, and that's Jenny Lemmer, who was elected as the Register of Deeds. That said, Jenny's not new to Marathon County. She's been with us for a fairly long time. You're a very, I wasn't going to say a year. She started when she was 5, working for Marathon County. But in all seriousness, I think Jenny can talk you through kind of her experience and what she's really leads into your next item, what she's looking to accomplish. Even in the last year's budget, I'll say Jenny was engaged in some form or fashion. Her and I have been talking. I think she's got a lot of good ideas. One of the things we put in place even before she took office was we had a plan to increase revenue within that office based on some changes we would make to the access charges for our system. And that's gone well. So really excited to talk through what Jenny's going to be looking to accomplish and introduce her to the committee. So take it away, Jenny. Anything else you want to add?
I've been president of North Central Community Action program for the last 4 years too. Some of the things that I am looking forward to doing this year, January 31st, we are upgrading our Landshark software. And then I am looking forward to doing some informational meetings for the public on genealogy searching and property real estate searching. I actually have one of the informational meetings already scheduled for March 25th, and that's going to be on genealogy. In April, Act 235 is going to take effect, and that's where we're going to have to shield certain documents, information on documents, and on vital records like marriage certificates. So the association is working on how that's going to be done. Another thing I'd like to try to get is an ordinance requiring PIN numbers and municipalities to be included on recorded deeds and mortgages. And other than that, I think that's
Well,
quite a bit.
and I'm not signing Jenny up for this, but we have talked about, I mean, we just got done talking about the title research we send out for parcels. I think there's an opportunity for us to do some of that, perhaps on certain types of parcels when we're going through the tax foreclosure process, that Jenny and her staff can kind of give us some insights on. I know we had, excuse me, there's one particular parcel that we're working on in the city of Schofield that Register of Deeds really helped us in pulling some documents to figure out if there were any liens or mortgages on it as we move forward with the human health hazard prosecution we were working on. So I think there's some opportunities as we talk about, or as I talk about with all departments, but certainly given the interplay between Register of Deeds, Treasurer's Office, Conservation Planning and Zoning, there's a lot of opportunities. Just how can we work better together? And Jenny had a little bit of a powwow with Conservation Planning and Zoning. They were down earlier, that was this week, right? To just really, again, introduce everybody, make sure we're aware of kind of the work that everyone's doing. Again, not to go back to the fee piece, but I will for a minute. That was a really big change. I don't know if there's anything you want to add on that, Jenny. I want to give you a shout out right away when you start.
Sure, that, so we had two companies that were paying like $20 a day for all images, which roughly was $400 to $440 a month. And we have upped that to $1,200 a month, and both of them are paying it.
Yeah. And the reason, I mean, that actually gets us closer to what other counties are doing. There's a bunch of different ways access to electronic documents works in counties, and Jenny's been kind of bringing some ideas back, which one of them she referenced, she's going to come forward with an ordinance that working with Mike's office to bring before the board, because state statute essentially is the floor of what is required for people to file a document. But there are some things like a PIN number that would really make it a lot better for us for record keeping, keep the system clean, that we can't require unless there's an ordinance. Other counties have those ordinances, so I give credit to Jenny. Taking a fresh look, new set of eyes is always good, and it's not the newest set of eyes. She was in that department for a while, and then she went over to the sheriff's office, so she's certainly got experience, and I'm sure you'll see things throughout the year, and we can give, again, moving to your next item already, but if there's things that you want any of the department heads, hey, what is your plan of work? I think Jenny's already working to put together that, here are the things on her plate. Act 235 is a big deal. That's going to be a lot more departments than just the Register of Deeds, but that's an act that allows judges to specifically request that judges and their family members, certain defined family members, to ask to shield their information from public search. So how we implement that is going to be a challenge. The whole state is going through it, but Jenny and the Register of Deeds office is going to be an important part.
Kurt?
Well, first off, Jenny, welcome, and welcome to your new position. So I have been in a fair a few meetings where we have been discussing Act 235, and I know the Register of Deeds Association has been working with WCA and also legislators on some cleanup language potentially and trailer language and trailer legislation to address some of the challenges that are there with 235. So I suspect that you've already potentially reached out, if you're not, with the treasurers or with the Register of Deeds Association, because Andy Phillips is working, as is WCA, working on potential cleanup on some of the challenges that are noticed, that have been identified by various Register of Deeds in various issues with Act 235, because it is tremendously enormous as far as trying to shield all of that information once you get a written request from a judge.
One good thing about that is this form that they have, as it applies to the Register of Deeds office, they have to actually tell us which document they want shielded. So we're not going to have to guess. They'll have to tell us.
Well, welcome. We'll keep asking you if you still enjoy it, but
I am so far.
if you keep showing up, we know you are, so thank you, and we wish you the best. So the next item is, or anything else, any other questions or comments relative for Jenny? All right. Committee relationship with constitutional officers, including but not limited to a discussion of form and frequency of reporting and creation of annual work plans for tracking of progress. And I want to start that discussion today, but we're missing 3 of the members of the committee, and I think it's important that we go forward. This is meant to be proactive and just trying to create what the expectations of the boards are. The constitutional officers are different than appointed officers from the perspective that they don't report to the administrator. They report, rather, this board and or other parties have authority over those positions, or ultimately the voters do. But we thought it was important to begin the discussion of, what would be helpful to us in the policymaking perspective in terms of expectations and understanding, so that you're not wondering what we're going to do. And I just jotted down some ideas, and again, I think we want to begin that discussion. But the Act 235 implementation would be one of those things that we would need to focus some time on, and we want to track in the county. For the treasurer, the schedule of notices and the delinquency, tax delinquency that we talked about earlier, and frequency of it. The whole issue of customer service for all the people. For the clerk, the tax deed property sales. Where are we with those things? And just beginning that discussion. I know Supervisor Marshall has some concerns that she'd like to see additional dashboards for those with reporting relationships to the committee. I think we'd like to begin that discussion, whether it's the Corporation Counsel's office, the clerk, the finance director, and the Human Resources Department. In Wood County, I've looked at some of our adjoining counties, but they have some periodic reports that are due to the committees, updates on critical issues, records retention, other things for the clerk. Human Resources tracks applications received, positions filled, promotions, et cetera. We might want to identify what those are, how many positions are vacant, et cetera. But I want to just plant the seed for continued discussions going forward when more of the committee is here. So I would ask if you as a department head, constitutional officer are working on a work plan, if you can share that with us, and we can begin the process of establishing dashboards and leading to more transparency and accountability. Sam, we did that with you sort of last meeting relative to the audit compliance. I think that's a great way for us to look forward. And we're looking at so when the county board members come to us and saying, when am I going to see all of the monthly reports or the quarterly reports, we have an idea relative to a work plan. And I think it's better in your best interest as county employees to have an understanding of what those are and what they're not, and moving forward. But I think, again, and I didn't find out till this morning that 2 of the members weren't going to be here today. And I know Supervisor Marshall, we've had a number of discussions relative to dashboards going forward. If you want to just throw in any thoughts?
I guess dashboards are super helpful in understanding activity, like how busy is your office? How many things are you processing? And so I guess we could look to other counties as you had done, but also it's been my experience that department heads typically provide a narrative. Hey, in this last month, this is what I've been doing, or this is what I've been planning. So besides having just numbers, having a narrative of what the activities are going forward or accomplishments is a great help.
Chair Gibbs.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think, having a work plan for each of those positions, it's critical. It provides clarity as to expectations. It provides clarity around, and sharing that work plan and potential deliverable dates, I think sets up expectations and provides context around, as Supervisor Marshall clearly stated. What are the activities that are going on? So the dashboard in conjunction with the work plan, I think is something that I would love to see from each of those departments. Now, obviously, the day-to-day operations is going to be critical. That's going to be, but is there something outside, Jenny, just for your example, obviously, the implementation of Act 235 and what is, we know we've got a deadline of, I think it's April 30th is the implementation date when they can first start applying for, redaction. So what are the needs that you're needing to assist you in that? And so coming up with a work plan, I think really provides, the committee the ability to say, yep, that's great, or we need to be working on this or that for each of the various departments.
And again, I'd like to continue the discussion when the full committee is here, but I just wanted to plant the seed, and we can begin. If you have some thoughts, if we can share those. But Wood County's Operation Committee seems to be very similar with reporting relationships to this committee. We can share some links to that. But and again, our goal is not to become involved in the operations. It is to look at issues that affect policy and the implementation of policy. And I think we need to be careful. And there's a difference between Wood County and Marathon County in that they've got an administrative coordinator, which leaves more authority with the county board than we do with a county administrator system. So I think we want to be careful that if we create the expectations, and ultimately we'll need, we can have the discussions on those expectations, but I think we want to not get into the day-to-day details of the operations of the department, but rather look at it from a policy and how are we doing relative to meeting our metrics and our goals. But that's the intent. And we appreciate the efforts of all of the people that have a reporting relationship to this committee. We're not doing this to be, I think there's some trepidation of why are you doing this? I think we're trying to do this from the perspective of transparency and accountability. And it's always easier to meet expectations if they're known. And it's very difficult to not meet expectations that are unknown, or it's very easy. And I think what we want to do is create those known expectations. So.
In light of the conversation about data dashboards or data reporting, Would it be helpful to this committee? I suspect I know the answer, but we have been going through each of the departments have been tasked with providing input, and then I have sat down with our data officer to create what we're looking to ultimately be a dashboard. And when I say dashboard, true Shangri-La end game is it's real-time updating. That is, it pulls data from existing systems within departments to automatically update. We're a long way from that. But in the short term, that iterative step is to frequently report on those key performance indicators for each department, and we've been framing them around, kind of to Supervisor Marshall's point, you have those ideas, those metrics that give you a sense of how busy are you, how much of something have you done. But the two other items that we've added, and this has been referenced in my work plan updates, are it's not only important how much of something that we do, but how well do we do it? And then the last one is anyone better off? So those three pieces for any program that we're offering, and we're not going to be able to start with all the programs right away, but I just met with our soon-to-be interim veteran service officer this morning to talk through what their kind of the vision of what those metrics will be for that office. Would it be helpful if I come back in the near future in a couple of meetings to walk through for this committee and the departments that you have oversight over what those programs we're going to start with and what those how well is anyone better off metrics have been that we're putting together? If that would, I suspect the answer would be yes, you'd like to see those. I can work to do that. It, again, won't be your next meeting, or probably not for maybe give me a couple of months, because we're still trying to, the justice system is the first one we really need to work through, because the challenge we're having is that we rely on an external entity for a lot of that data, and it's not clean or complete. And that's where I've identified as the place for that staff person to work first, but we certainly do have the KPIs identified for all the other departments, so I can bring that forward at a future meeting.
Supervisor Marshall?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I think that would be super helpful to understand what you see as the KPIs, and that we would have possibly some input into that. Thank you.
Mayor Gibbs? Okay. Supervisor Reynolds, or any other questions? All right, we'll move on. More to come. All right, recommendations relative to long-term funding source for pollution liability insurance for landfill operations at all. Mike.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will kick us off. First, I'll note our risk. I'm just going to call you our county risk manager because I forgot your title. Our risk manager, Jamie, is here with me. Also on by audio is Eric Zahner. He's our insurance broker from Robertson and Ryan, and he helps us identify what our current policies are, assists us in getting new policies. He's super helpful. Robertson Ryan has been great to work with. So this conversation actually started when my office started working with risk management in the county. One of the gaps that was identified really was what would happen in the event that there was a pollution event, particularly at our solid waste facility. What protections do we have in place? And we do have a pollution liability fund currently in place, but we haven't, at least since the 1990s, had any insurance policies covering potential pollution liability. So we had some conversations with Eric and his Robertson and Ryan team. They went out to the market to see, what are other municipalities doing, what are other organizations doing in this space, what kinds of insurance are available to organizations. And we actually did identify that there was some pretty competitive pollution liability insurance available with several different options available to us. We took that question to our solid waste management board, and they were very supportive of looking into securing some insurance. And based on that, we did jump on in your packet, there's two options listed. We jumped on the $5 million limit, which has an annual premium of $15,063.75, including taxes. So we jumped on that for 2025 because that's a discretionary purchase, and I wanted to make sure we locked in the rates. And we paid that out of our risk management funds. But a longer-term discussion is, I guess, do we want to continue to have both insurance and a pollution liability fund? Is there a balance between how much is in the fund and what's covered by insurance? Is there a preference on how we pay for that pollution liability insurance moving forward? Do we pay for that out of the fund? Do we pay for it out of something else? And I'm certain there are a lot of questions just about coverage. That's why I had Eric join us. I can give you the real basics, and Eric can answer specific questions that I'm sure some of you will have. Our current policy does cover both on-site cleanup and third-party pollution liability. There is a $10,000 deductible per pollution condition. There are also defense expenses that are covered under that policy, transportation coverage for certain items as well. And there are certain things that are excluded. I'm fairly certain that PFAS are excluded from our pollution liability insurance because they're excluded from everything, every insurance you could find. So there, in my estimation, there certainly is an advantage of having a fund. Really, I think there is a policy question about what's the balance between the fund and insurance. So that's kind of what we brought as a wide-ranging policy question for you. I neglected to mention our solid waste director, Dave Hagenbusher, is here as well. He's been involved in these conversations also as far as, what's the best protection for his department. So I will throw that out there. Lance, do you have anything?
Yeah, I would just add, I think Mike did a nice job at teeing that up. It's a question of risk tolerance, which is certainly a policy question for the board. The operational piece that Dave has done a nice job in talking through with the Solid Waste Management Board, I think you're all familiar based on our audit and the conversations that we've had at previous committee meetings, and certainly at ERC we made a presentation. There are challenges with long-term care and closure liability, at least on the financials, if you look at the financial statements for solid waste. Depending on, again, risk tolerance, the question before the board is that if you go with insurance and you decide what that risk tolerance is, and to Mike's point, maybe it is a balance of insurance and some reserve funds. You have $2.8 million approximately in that fund right now. You would arguably allow that to be freed up, and Dave can talk more in detail if you want, where we can give you a link to a meeting where we talked about it at ERC at a previous meeting, about the needs that exist at solid waste. Simply put, stuff is expensive at solid waste. You close a cell, add a cell, it's really, really expensive. And it got a lot more expensive over the last couple of years. So that's the other financial side of this conversation. But again, Mike did a very nice job. It's a discretionary purchase. We made the decision. Mike reached out to me, fully support the decision moving forward for that initial $15,000 purchase, and we can reevaluate. But it's that blend. This is, as the chair referenced before, there's some operations and policy. The line here is not very stark. I mean, you need to give us some guidance on your risk tolerance, and then we'll move forward. But without any insurance policy, we certainly would need to maintain the fund. With an insurance policy, you may still decide you want to maintain a fund, but at least it opens up the conversation.
Chair Gibbs.
Thank you. My question really centers around, to look at it from a perspective of financial management and what is in the best interest. What is our bonding cost? Because we have a shortfall in reserves for long-term closure. Do we have an understanding what the cost is for that bonding to bond for the shortfall in our long-term care fund?
Yeah, I'll speak on behalf of the owner financial responsibility. So DNR sets up these policies where we have to put in so much for OFR, it's long-term care and closure for each cell. And since the beginning of the Bluebird landfill, we've actually purchased a letter of credit that sufficed and started putting money aside, even though this letter of credit satisfied that OFR responsibility. That letter of credit right now is costing us $50,000 to $70,000 a year. So that's the cost to have that letter of credit there. Now, if we were to fully fund that, that would be able to go away. We wouldn't have that expense then anymore. So that's, just from a standpoint of that, being able to fully fund those accounts. And as our administrator alluded to, some of these have increased nearly 30% over the last 5 years. Really incredible amount. And we want to make sure they're funded as quickly as we can get them funded. And this pollution liability fund, as the memo states, this isn't statutorily required. This isn't mandated. This was something that Marathon County decided to do back in the 90s. And it was a bit of a legacy concern of the Holtz-Krause dump site that was polluted and had contamination throughout the community.
So, Mike, I have a question relative to pollution liability coverage. Do we have it for the airport, the highway department, parks department? And if not, should we?
We do not at this time. Our initial review was where would this be the most appropriate and necessary, and so this policy is specific to the solid waste department land. Should we is a good question. I think there are different pollution liability issues with those other departments, but they do exist. How much of that would be covered under our general liability insurance is another question. I think it's a good question. I don't have a good answer for you, but it's certainly worth the discussion.
I would request that you take a deep dive into those issues, particularly any case where we've got underground storage tanks. I think that there may be a requirement that you have some sort of policies. And I will just share with you my observations over the last 30 years is that when Holtz-Krause started, there was occurrence insurance policies. They've now gone to claims made. The difference is you have to have a policy in place that the year that the claim was made versus when it occurred. They have provided more and more exemptions for environmental coverage. They have recently this year started PFAS exclusions, and there's no guarantee relative to insurance in the future. My strong recommendation is that we basically have created a self-funded account to deal with unknown future liability, something we're working on for health insurance to try to get to self-funded so we don't have to pay those premiums, have letters of credit and other things for those unforeseens. I would really be cautious relative to compromising the integrity of that fund. You may want to look at, can we create some opportunities for loaning and using those assets relative to satisfying portions of the letter of credit, but I would hope that we would, in the long term, not jeopardize what we started to create in light of Holtz-Krause. And Holtz-Krause, that landfill closed in 1980, only to have the DNR ask them for the county or the operators to keep it open until the county landfill was done. And 1,364 parties settled and made payments for that cap. That liability came out of the owners or people in possession and control of the landfill, the arrangers, the transporters, and the generators. The county's liability as being in possession and control, arranging for the operation. We may have some liability for renewable natural gas that goes beyond. I think we just want to, in the area of pollution liability, be careful going forward and be deliberate. I don't have a problem with having the policy. I would like to see the terms and the conditions of the policy relative to the exclusions and other things, because some of the policies that I've looked at historically intend to cover something until a release has occurred. And I'm hoping that we have better coverage, but some of those early policies for the petroleum, the underground storage tanks were not worth the paper that they were written on, and many of those companies are no longer in existence. But I can guarantee you that when claims get high, things get excluded from future policies. And I think that fund is a good thing for the county to have, and the question is, what's the appropriate level? Supervisor Marshall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In the meeting at the ERC, did you, Dave, talk about the long-term care and closure needs for, like, how much of a deficit do we have in those funds? Was that talked about?
We did talk about that. I would have to double check, but I want to say it's in the range of about 6 million. That we don't have to fully fund the long-term care accounts. They don't have to be fully funded. We can continue putting money into those year after year. The closure accounts either need to be fully funded or we need to do the letter of credit, and these funds are set up as escrows, so they're actually controlled by DNR. They are not invested to make a lot of interest. There's been years where we've actually seen very significant decreases in what the value of those accounts were. So there has actually been a push to change legislation on that, but the final ruling on that isn't quite ready to be rolled out yet to the general industry. So right now that's about where we're sitting. So we're not facing a non-compliance issue. If we were facing a compliance issue, this would probably be a different scenario. But we are still in compliance with where we need to be.
Just a follow-up question. Would it make sense to take the 2.8 million that we currently have, apply it to the long-term care and closure, and reduce the amount that we have to pay for a letter of credit? Is that a possibility?
It is. It probably, I believe the liability fund was set up through resolution, so there again, we'd have to go through the appropriate actions to override that, but you most certainly could.
And that's precisely that. There are options available without the insurance, and you still could, because as was alluded to, it's not statutorily required to have either, but I suspected you'd want to have something. And Dave, do you want to elaborate a little bit on, Dave referenced the potential for legislation change. There has been that discussion. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it's municipal government-owned landfills have a certain calculation and the private sector has a different.
Yeah, we'll probably be discussing that more middle of the year. So right now, laws were passed late last year and it went into emergency rulemaking. And what it is it's for these owner financial responsibility requirements under DNR, it's going to allow public sector entities to utilize what's called a net worth test. Up until now, this hasn't been allowed for public landfills or public solid waste divisions. It's only been allowed for private sectors. So basically, utilizing the value of all your assets and say, okay, well, we could just sell all this and then that's our value. So that is continuing to move along. I know our finance director has been working with Baker Tilly to get a better understanding of where Marathon County could go relative to that. But at this time, we're just still working on it. Sam, do you have any updates on that?
I did email them. I was a little bit behind the 8 ball on that, but they are working forward with it. They've been dealing directly with the Wisconsin DNR, getting information so that they can provide the service. So we've got it in play. I haven't heard back from them though because they're not in the office this week.
And just to add to that, if we do meet the requirements of the net worth test and we satisfy that through our OFR, then we would be able to take whatever funds are in those long-term care and closure accounts and invest them into our own interest-making accounts that would be much more sustainable and viable, and however Marathon County would want to do it.
So, Mike, as a question before us, what do we do right now relative to the pollution liability coverage? You funded it out of the risk management fund. That seems appropriate at this time while we evaluate our options. But I would really, so much is unknown. I know Dave's dealing with the issue of PFAS because we serve on a committee together. Those are forever chemicals they're called forever chemicals for a reason. They're going to be in the environment for all of our lifetimes, plus some, and they're very costly to address. I think we want to make sure that and if their coverage is excluded in policies, I think we want to have a plan in place. So unless we're released from liability through the state of Wisconsin, that we can take care and address those and other emerging contaminant issues going forward. So I would really caution us against just taking the proceeds of that fund and applying it to long-term care, because I think that there are some potential surprises in the future and liabilities that are unknown.
As far as action today, as I said, the purchase for 2025 was done out of the risk management fund. I think moving forward in 2026, we can deal with how to fund that in the budget. I don't think you have to make a decision today on what to do with that entire fund, or whether to do anything with that fund. I think, to your point, that's a big conversation with a lot of moving parts. So if the final result of this discussion was education, then I think that's totally appropriate, given that there's going to be definitely some continued conversations about some of those issues that Dave identified and that Sam mentioned.
Chair Gibbs.
I had an opportunity to talk to Supervisor Mask, who sits on the solid waste board. I know one of the challenges that the solid waste department has been challenged with is leachate and controlling of leachate and disposing of leachate. So I know there's looking at, I think, a recommendation once we understand what the potential or the potential solutions are there long term may inform us also a little bit about the utilization of these funds rather than just moving them directly now to long-term closure, because I think there may be a capital need if we look at a long-term solution for leachate and the cost of treating that leachate now.
Unlimited opportunities for us to get involved in policy discussions as it relates to environmental liability. So let me throw this out there. Could I request that from a risk management perspective, we look at the county operations as a whole for 2026, and the pricing of the policy seems very favorable. From that perspective, I just would like to know what the coverage terms are. But I think when you look at the airport operations, I know it's a joint operation, but there is a potential for a number of releases to the environment. You look at highway, both on shop and off shop perspectives, chlorides, the storage of chlorides and et cetera, and the Parks Department relative to the number of vehicles and chemicals that they deal with. And, we probably have other operations, but if we could look at it comprehensively for the county and look at how we might go about addressing the pollution liability coverage going forward, that might help drive the discussion on how do we pay for it.
I think that's a great idea, and one that Jamie has on her work plan already for 2025 is evaluating that for all of our departments as we look at insurance as a whole. That's as we get a little bit more used to this process. That's one of the things that we've been continuously evaluating, and Jamie does a really good job of working with our broker on that. So that's direction is well taken, and we will certainly do that.
Anything else? So thank you for that update. I look forward to continued discussions. All right, jumping to 6B1, abolish senior administrative specialist and create a FTE, human resource specialist position in the sheriff's office. Are you taking the lead or Bill?
I'll take it, and then Bill will answer all the hard questions. Just for background, why this is before this committee, we made a presentation to public safety earlier this week. That was yesterday. You have an ordinance. This is really, you might say, hey, this seems like an operational administrative decision. I would agree with you. But you have an ordinance that it lays out a process through which any new position would go. And it requires it to start at the standing committee, also go to this committee, and then ultimately the full board. So the desire, simply put, is that we have what I will term HR related, or even perhaps a better term, HR adjacent work that is done in departments. And that's not unique. But what is unique is the sheriff's office is by far our largest department. So they have a lot of HR adjacent work. Things like when we have a vacancy, reaching out to HR, ensuring that within each department, we review the job description, make sure it's still up to date, propose changes, provide a proposed calendar for posting of a position, then being involved in screening of applicants, ultimately scheduling the interviews, and then staff within the department schedule interviews. So there's a lot of that HR adjacent work, including things like onboarding, training, record maintenance. Because the sheriff's office is the largest department, this is similar to the conversation we've had with finance. How can I expand the reach of HR services? Because I know there's not, as this committee knows very well, there's not additional tax levy that I can just say, hey, the HR department, here's another $150,000 to create a position because I know they need it. Because, if you think about, just for context, the requests I have of HR are greater than the requests perhaps that existed 10 years ago. Part of that is things outside of our control. We have a lot more HR transactions. To Supervisor Marshall's point before about data, there's more turnover. The workforce is different. Post-pandemic, people don't come to the county often. They still do, which is great. I just had a conversation this morning where the person told me, I want to retire from here. I love hearing that. But there's a lot of people that, they look at jobs differently. I think some of that is following the pandemic and just the changing demographics of the workforce. We also have, again, my requests of HR, I want them more involved. Our risk manager just left. There's a lot of stuff with HR. If you don't do it right, you can find yourself in trouble. And I don't like being in trouble. Former lawyer, I'm generally risk averse. And then Workday. Workday's been great from my perspective in that it makes sure that it retains a record that we're doing things appropriately. But because we have more transactions and that system is there, it does require, it makes sure you're doing all the things that before we thought we were doing all the time, but quite honestly, we probably weren't. So there's more work. And how can I do that with tax levy limitations? I have to look for opportunities to take positions and activities that are happening within a department, specialize them, centralize activities to where we can say, hey, there's now there's enough HR need to create an HR-specific individual, and starting in our largest department made the most sense. And there were circumstances within the sheriff's office with, quite honestly, Jenny being elected. She was employed in the sheriff's office. Some internal promotion occurred within the sheriff's office, which then allowed for consideration, as we always do, of how can we do things more efficiently. So long story short, we're asking you to abolish an administrative position within the sheriff's office and create an HR specialist position that will report not only to the sheriff's office, but also concurrently with HR. Similar to things we've talked about with finance, but we did this with the DA's office position, with the investigator, moving it to the sheriff's office. Similar logic to that move, similar logic to our former park ranger position that we had in the Parks Department, moving that position upon that individual's retirement to the sheriff's office, and having that joint reporting relationship. So it is not a net increase in FTE. It is abolish one type of position, create another. And there's no request for a budget amendment based on the specific costs that were budgeted in 2025 for the previously existing senior administrative position. But that's a high-level background. Long-term, from my perspective as the administrator, I think we're going to need to keep doing this because I don't know our internal service departments, whether you're talking HR or finance, they have a need. There's more of a need for that assistance to ensure a high level of performance. But I know there's not new levy coming for that. So I need to find these opportunities, and starting in the large departments are, quite honestly, the easiest ones. So happy to answer any questions, but Public Safety did get the presentation. They approved it to move forward consistent with the existing process. And it is on the board agenda for tomorrow for discussion.
Is there a fiscal impact associated with this?
The fiscal impact is in the bottom of the resolution. The position is a higher class than the senior administrative professional position, but because the senior administrative professional position was budgeted, because the incumbent in that position, all the change in terms of kind of internal promotion, that was budgeted at a higher cost than the entry point for the proposed position. We're not requesting a budget amendment. So long story short, no, in terms of budget requirement for a budget amendment.
Deputy Millhausen?
I just would reiterate what Administrator Leonard said, is that obviously most of you have been in positions and have heard our staffing needs over the last few years. And it's a weekly, if not daily, occurrence with 200 plus employees that we're constantly recruiting, we're constantly interviewing, we're constantly reviewing applications. And quite honestly, we're tasking staff members that have many other duties to do other than some of these HR-related tasks. And I think that we have grown to separate from HR and taken on more of those internally just to try and expedite processes. And that's not necessarily a good way to do things. And then we have to circle back with HR and let them know where we're at with stuff. So I think this would be a great opportunity and a nice conduit between our office and HR, whether it be on the hiring side or it be on the discipline side, whatever. I think it would just help with continuity of operations as a whole for the county. And it certainly would, we've got requirements of state reporting and things like that for our training. We would envision this being a merged position with some of those duties that the previous senior administrative specialist was doing with regards to that. But as you can imagine, all of our sworn staff have to have 24 hours of in-service, and that has to get reported to the state. We have 91 of those people, so there's a lot of administrative tasks that we're looking to merge with the HR position. And I just think it, to Lance's point, I think this is a great model to look towards with trying to share some of the workload with limited resources.
Chair Gibbs.
So I guess this is a question I'll pose to the administrator, and I think I know the answer to the question, but I'm going to pose it anyway. And that is, I don't believe that our current HR staff has the capacity to take over some of the responsibilities that the sheriff's department staff have been doing. And I think that lends itself to a potential risk that things fall through the cracks. And so I guess the question becomes literally, does HR staff have the capacity to take on this with the current HR staff and HR office?
I'm going to do a pivot to your question because I don't think it's things that HR's not doing that are falling through the cracks, or that if it wouldn't make sense to have HR do a lot of the things that this person is doing now, because to the chief's point, there are really requirements of the sheriff's office, but they're so close that I think even if nothing else, we were able to take some of the more still limited discretion or perhaps even non-discretionary acts that HR is still doing. Like if you think about just the act of posting the job and closing the job posting and packaging the recruitment materials for consideration by the department, even if just that stuff goes away, it will help long term. I want to also be very clear. I think in the short term, it's going to be more work for both as we navigate what this is going to look like. I had that meeting with HR staff earlier. In the sheriff's office, starting with them is largely a function of circumstance. They are the largest department, which makes a fair amount of sense as well. But there's also a lot of unique stuff that they have that it might have been easier to start in a large department that doesn't have quite the unique stuff that they have. But, we don't get to make all those choices. So I wouldn't say it's a question of things that HR doesn't have the capacity to shift to it, because we would never be doing those things in the first place. The things the sheriff's office is doing in terms of reporting, like Bill's talking about, making sure that training records are maintained and submitted to the state databases, doing internal onboarding. Those are things that all departments still we all have to give thought to onboarding. I'm going to be onboarding a new position here hopefully in the next month, a new staff member. There's an internal onboarding that needs to happen and a countywide organizational one that needs to happen. This is an opportunity to have enhanced what I'll call collaboration and coordination on those efforts. That said, I do think in the short term, it's going to be more work. HR is going to have to, I envision onboarding for this position to start in HR. I mean, they're going to need to get up to speed on HR things, what we do on the countywide general perspective. And then they need to learn also the sheriff's office. What are the needs there? Meet the division commanders and build those relationships. I don't have here's the blueprint, but I see a need across the county. I'd love to just say, hey, I need 2 more HR staff. But I also know if I showed up saying, hey, county board, I need 2 more HR staff, you'd ask me, all right, what's the plan? How are you going to fund it? And I know there's not levy for that. But can we identify the opportunities that are alluded to in this, in the memo, kind of laying out the logic? It makes a lot of sense, provided we have that strong relationship with internal HR to have somebody working primarily with the sheriff's office. Right now, we have an HR professional that is assigned to in the HR department that is assigned to the sheriff's office. We break every department. They're assigned 1 to 2 people. She spends a lot of time working with Bill and division commanders. They're all really busy in HR. My hope is that over time, we can identify those opportunities just to be more efficient with the resources we have, because new ones aren't necessarily coming.
Joe Gibbs.
Yeah, I fully support the the moving forward with this. And I wasn't trying to put you in a position that was awkward, but I think it's a great opportunity, especially when we've identified the ability to take the resources from one position and move it to a different position as the need has developed and increased, and as the Chief Deputy has mentioned.
Supervisor Marshall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I noticed under the qualifications that it said HR certification was advantageous. I would just caution that, being risk averse, Lance, that there are a lot of laws around recruitment and hiring, and to make sure that that person has a solid background in that.
Yeah, we try to be as open-minded with respect to recruitment qualifications versus what is preferred, but certainly getting them that training. That's why I said the first place they're going to need to start is, I'd love to hire somebody and they have a HR background. So if you know anybody, send them our way. But they're going to need to learn HR rules, not only state law, federal laws, but then also how do we do HR with our own internal policies. I totally agree with you.
Any other questions, comments, motions? Chair Gibbs.
Make a motion that I approve the abolishing of one FTE senior administrative specialist and creating one FTE human resources specialist position in the sheriff's office and moving it to the county board for consideration.
There's seconded by Supervisor Marshall. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor will signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. That motion carries unanimously. Quarterly budget to actual reports through December. Sam.
One thing to note on the summary page, I did make an error under the contingency fund. It should be 0 in the total expenditures. We did utilize about $26,000 for a health department. I just have to change the budgetary side, but that was put into the facilities for the condemned property. Reports are in the packet. These are still in progress as we're working through year end and review. So I will bring them back once they are finalized. But I wanted to be able to present them just to make you guys aware. May I answer any questions relative to any specific departments?
I have a question relative to reconciliation with the budget. So we have, I'll just pick on the DA because they're not here, but they're at 104.41% of budget. How do we reconcile that? And, they're operating at a deficit. How do we handle that internally?
Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to comb through all of the transactions and make sure that they were coded appropriately. So DA has some special circumstances where they do have grants that 50-50 split, make sure that everyone was going to the right grant. And specifically to them, they did have some unique scenarios. Expert witnesses were over by $10,431. They had a retirement, which was about $14,000. And then transcription was almost $18,000 over the original budget. In their budget, sometimes there are things that are outside of their ability to control, such as the expert witnesses and transcription. When those do come into place, if it's over the overall appropriation and they don't have revenue supporting it, they can request contingency at the end of the year. We are continuing to look at that, but it will then be brought forth. And sometimes it's hard to catch some of these things in advance because as we get to the end of the year, sometimes they're really cutting it close.
And then the second thing that when we talked about before the meeting is that I would appreciate if we could expand the report to include revenue side. I think it's important for us to not only know, are we meeting, where are we relative to the expenditures, but where are we relative to revenue? So if you could expand it to include budgeted revenue, actual revenue, and percent. Chair Gibbs.
So Sam, to follow up with John, so at some point, if they are over budget, there will be a budget amendment to close, that is retroactive, closing out the 2024 budget to actual? Okay.
Yes.
And if I could just add one thing to, I think building on again, a thing that I hope you're all thinking, I'll just say it as Sam did. One of the goals of our new financial system is to be more proactive and allow departments to have greater kind of insight as to where they're trending and is there a likelihood of them going over. I'll pick my department right now. I mean, I look like, hey, we're going to come in under. I know we have some large bills that are still hanging out. That number will certainly get tighter. I'm confident we won't go over. But we do want to get to a point, I think what you were alluding to, Mr. Chair, where, hey, if there are expenditures like expert witnesses and things like that are looking like we're going to go over, the goal is to have that identified earlier. I mean, quite honestly, those two things, expert witnesses and translation, were mentioned in the, or interpretation and translation, were mentioned in the budget the last 2 years because those costs, like Dave referenced for long-term care and closure, those have translation costs and interpretation costs have just escalated so rapidly. Similar to what we've seen in other inflationary areas. So that was one of the rationales for maintaining that high level of contingency. So moving forward, my goal is to have, if there's a large expenditure, really let's have that come in for a contingency request during the year. Said it's a balance. We also don't want to come in for a contingency request when it is likely within the budget. So we'll navigate that. Overall, I think you'll see the departments are pretty close. Again, depending on when things hit, I think that's one thing we'll figure out, not only the mapping, but when do things hit so we kind of have a better sense of trending. But do you want to give a couple of examples, if you have them off the top of your head, Sam, of when some of those things that do come in later in the year that can cause challenges for budgeting?
Absolutely. So, and just because it's such a big budget and big swings can happen in their sheriff's office, for example, we do their comp payout on the last physical payroll in 2024 or in the last December payment. So they're, again, falling outside of the normal. You may have bills that you are waiting for on projects that are coming through. So it's not like our normal contracts that we have with a corporation or organization like the Humane Society. We put installment payments, same thing with North Central Healthcare. These might be things that we were working on. Other things that will come in the January or year-end closing are credit card statements. You'll see phone and allocations sometimes because we're not sure where some of those allocations ended up at the end of the year. In particular, in mine, I have auditing fees in there. So rather than do multiple journal entries as they bill us each time, I can allocate those more towards the end of the year. In addition to the 2025 work plan was to have clearer reporting. So you will start to see where the budgets will balance within themselves. Tax levy will be allocated appropriately so that we can track that for long-term strategic planning and just review, as well as those reviews being done with the departments to make sure that they're aware of it, because not every department has an accountant level financial person who is there supporting them. So that was one of the big points for the centralization of finance in the 2025 work plan.
Chair Gibbs.
Specifically on one of the summaries, we're talking about grants, and I think grants went over the amended budget and total expenditure. Is that potentially just an allocation issue? Because obviously we didn't get additional grant money. So I guess I'm just asking for a little bit of clarification.
Yeah, absolutely. And what that is it's the budget for versus the actual expenditures. So if we flip over to 291, it could be unbilled grants. A lot of times we are seeking reimbursements, or it's sitting in an asset account because it's a deferred revenue or a liability, sorry. And we can't recognize that until we fully spent it. So sometimes it's the timing issues of the grants fund in and of itself was designed to balance out to zero. So any grant monies that we're receiving should then be used up by the grant amounts that we're expending. Any match portions that are not being covered by grant funds then should be tracked in the department who is responsible for that grant.
Supervisor Marshall.
Yes, on page 48 on the insurance fund, I noticed on the insurance under fixed charges, we had budgeted 5.8 million, but the actuals came in at 12.8 million. And I know that when we budget for vacant positions as if they're taking family care, but even with that, it seems like a large discrepancy of.
Am I highlighting?
In a good way.
Am I highlighting the right line? You're talking about 50, we budgeted for 15 and it's 12? Okay.
Yes, so there again, the 15 or almost 16 million there is just a budgetary number. Only the actuals are coming through. The other things that we do kind of somewhat take into consideration is there are other portions of that, again, salary and wage. We do have the HRA and things like that too. But it is truly the actuals that are in the year-to-date column.
The personnel seems a little bit, 875,000 is, so is that's not just county personnel, is it?
It is.
So that's the people that administer the benefit plan?
Correct.
Okay.
Within HR, yeah.
Yep.
We can come back and let you know which staff are funded in which departments, but it's broader than just HR. I believe Jamie, a portion of Jamie, our risk managers, salaries pulled out of there. We certainly do fund a number of people like our benefits specialist in the HR department, but we can get you an FTE allocation.
And one thing to note in the employee benefits, it does include workers' comp, health insurance, dental, and I think there's one more. If you have a moment, I can pull that in. And then the property or Jamie's position is in the next fund under 710, property and casualty. She should be underneath that one, or a portion of her wages. Go back here. So employee benefits is the health insurance program, the dental program, the county HRA program, the FSA program, workers' comp. There's a wellness plan and the EAP program, which is the employee assistance program.
So the salaries in that, and we can look into this more, but the salary portion of that personnel line is the 105. The actuals are just shy of 106,000. I take it your question is more toward what contributes to the employee benefit line within personnel of the $800,000 number? Okay, we can look at that. I don't know that off the top of my head.
That one I want to believe is probably a mismapping, just given the context of it. But again, we'll report back on the disparity there.
And thank you for at least giving us a temporary or a tentative view of what the year end looked like. Thank you.
All right, any other questions? If not, thank you. We'll move on to property sales.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be very brief since it's already late. So this was the first large batch of properties that we listed with Wisconsin Surplus. And I cannot tell you how thrilled I am with working with that organization. They are just very professional, on the ball. If I have questions, I get responses within probably 15 minutes. So they are just incredible to work with. So in the first batch of in-rem tax foreclosures that Mike's office processed in the fall, we had 19 parcels, and we listed 12 of those. Some of them will be listed later this month. The first batch that we listed, we sold all 12 of those. And watching down at the very end, it was kind of fun because if there were active bids or if there were bids, then the auction automatically extended for another 10 minutes. So we sat there all day and kind of watched a couple parcels in particular, extended another 10 minutes, extended another 10 minutes. And it was fun to watch that bid price keep going up and up. So the 12 parcels that we sold will have a check coming to us from Wisconsin Surplus for $274,288. So that's really exciting. The other parcels that we haven't listed yet, one of those parcels was cleared by the Sheriff's Department today. 3 others are scheduled to be cleared by the Sheriff's Department within the next week. Those are evictions that Mike's office also processed. 2 of the parcels you had approved that we combine the parcels so that it could be more easily sold. That combination work has been done by our real property lister. And so we will have we'll have 5 more parcels ready to list by the end of the month. One of the parcels that was taken, you had approved to be held out for the Parks Department. And then one of the parcels is being researched for a right-of-way issue by the Highway Department. And I believe Facilities is also working with them on that. So we'll have those 5 other parcels ready to be listed here shortly. And those are some bigger dollar amount parcels. So we'll also, I'm expecting we'll have another bidding war on our hands because some of those have houses on them. So that should be really very lucrative as well. So just wanted to give you an update on where we were with those parcels. They're all sold. We're working on processing the deeds and the real estate transfers with the Department of Revenue so that we can get those out to the new owners of those properties. So this has just been a really good experience, and I am anxiously awaiting the next batch, as I know Mike is as well, so that we can get those taken and sold. And we hope to do a few batches this year to get these properties back on the tax rolls. Thank you. Does anybody have any questions?
Chair Gibbs.
Kim, I guess there's 2 questions. Now, I understand we are going to receive a check for $274,288. Do we know what the debt was against those properties, and then also whether or not we have any potential liabilities back to the prior owners of those parcels under the state requirement that the excess funds be provided back to the former owners?
That's a very good question, and it's one I figured would be coming. So I checked with Mike, and he is working on getting that information. He has kind of a total for the whole parcel, all 19, which we haven't sold all of them yet, but we'll get that information hopefully for the next meeting.
One other piece of information, there was a request, I believe Supervisor Marshall asked, hey, is there a way to get for sale signs out? That is one of the things working. Oh, take it away, Kim.
That's a funny question because I was talking with someone down there at Wisconsin Surplus right as the listing was about to go live, and I said, do you guys have a template, anything as far as for sale signs that we could use to put up at these parcels? I said, what's the best practice? What do other counties do? And she said, well, we do have for sale signs, and our company owner is on his way up to Wausau right now to place all the for sale signs at the properties. And I said, he's driving all the way up here. It's 3 hours one way. And she said, oh, it's just part of the service we provide. And then I said, okay, so what about taking them down when the auction is over and the properties are sold? She said, we got you. We'll take care of it. So that was a discussion that Lance and I had about if we did go with for sale signs, who was going to be responsible to stay on top of those. It's part of what Wisconsin Surplus does for us. So that was a nice surprise.
That is great. Thank you. Any other questions? If not, you are always welcome to give a report like that. It's just,
Yeah, all of your reports can be just that positive.
I'll
Excellent.
do
Thank
my
you.
best.
yeah.
Am I okay to respond to the employee benefits line that was over? Is
Yes.
that okay? It was the HRA reimbursement. The 2025 budget, which was probably consistent with 2024, was $748,500, but it did get looped into that line. So,
Okay, thank you. All right, any other items for future discussions? I know we the whole issue of the process and for the health insurance is one. We've got a number of other issues in our work plan. The meeting for the 21st has been postponed for a week because Administrator Leonard is going to be out of the country. But it also gives us more time. I think we would like to have him be here with us at future meetings. So we'll have a second meeting. We just need to do some catch up on some of our work plan items. So we'll have a meeting on the 28th. So anything else come before us? If not, that infamous motion is moved by Supervisor Marshall, seconded by Chair Gibbs. All those in favor of adjournment will signify by saying aye. Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That motion carries unanimously. Can I see? Do you have a minute?